Right, back live with you tonight, here on In Focus, and thanks for staying on. Yesterday we saw President Cyril Ramaphosa addressing the gathering of ANC members and community members, giving a report back on promises they made in 2019, numbers not looking really good in terms of 86% of what they had promised. They've actually not yet achieved for some or other reason because of COVID-19 and the battered economy. But by and large, recounting some of the things that the party has achieved. ANC Youth League Fasiha Hassan is joining us now to reflect on the youth perspective on the manifesto review, but also the question on illegal mining and how the president would seek to address that in particular. Fasiha, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time.
Thanks for having us, Thabo. We're happy to be here as the Youth League.
It must be a concern for you that South Africa is sitting with 60% youth unemployment. 60%.
Yeah, concern is not even the word. Crisis level.
And all we can really report is what? Some 230,000 jobs that would have been created in 4 years. What's your perspective on that? It cannot be that you as the youth would be satisfied with those kind of numbers.
There's absolutely no way. As young people, as the ANC Youth League, we're at a crisis level in terms of youth unemployment, and that's one thing that across the board, whether it's civil society, whether it's the state, whether it's even the private sector, that's this general consensus. Yeah. Now that's important, yes, but what are we all doing about it? And that's the big call that we have been pushing for some time now, but are going to continue to push, and you're going to see we're going to push even harder in this upcoming election. We acknowledge that youth unemployment is structural. We know that there are many issues around that. But that's still not enough of an excuse for us to not push in different sectors. So the first thing is around looking at those high growth economy elements that we haven't invested enough. Yeah. It's around the skills mismatch, etc., etc. President spoke to a few of those things, and I'm referring to the president of the country. But it's still not enough. And that's been a huge fighting force from us as young people, yes, in society, but even in the party, even in NEC meetings, and even in that space. Because frankly speaking, something has to change.
Yeah. You speak of sunrise industries, and mining being one of them. I'm starting there because I want to dovetail into that particular question on the action plan that needs to be taken. Because the reason why we are seeing illegal mining is because of unemployed people. People want to make a living. People want to play in the economic space. And by and large, you'll find that there are young people who are there as well wanting to play in that space. But what we are learning and what we are seeing, for example, in the various events that have been taking place, is that there are some kingpins who are running this thing. By and large, many of them not being South African nationals. But there are these young people who are South African who are participating in this, who are picking up a crumb here and there, right? And the president says, well, part of what needs to happen, firstly, is to deal with the laws, because all you can ever charge them for is trespassing. So make it a little bit tighter, make sure that the companies, rehabilitate, that's what I'm looking for, those spaces. But how do young people take advantage of that space?
So a few things. The first is we agree with the president around the rule of law. It's fundamentally important. That doesn't absolve the obligation to assist in creating an environment to create jobs. I know there's always a debate in a developmental state who's meant to create the jobs. That's a separate argument. So we agree that many would turn to different types of informal economy, etc., to make money. I think that's one point. However, illegal mining is a very dangerous thing. Apart from the actual process of it being very precarious and dangerous for those who enter into those mine shafts, what we're seeing and what we're hearing from communities is that it's extremely unsafe for them. Unfortunately, and you mentioned the word kingpin, unfortunately, there's a whole other industry, and industry is not the right word, it's a criminal network that has really sort of surfaced up around the illegal mining. And it's not just the state who has a responsibility. Of course, President Ramaphosa has spoken to that. And I think even in the past, Minister Bekele has spoken to the creation of specialized units within the police force, which is fundamental. But private sector also has a role to play here. There are so many gold mining, or not just gold mines, just general mines, where they haven't been collapsed properly and they haven't been dealt with. And this is actually a perfect example of that social compact, where everybody needs to come together. the state, private sector, labor, and ultimately young people who want to compete in that economy, who want to compete in the beneficiation sort of supply chain in a way that's, number one, legal, but number two, gives us opportunities at skills and gives us opportunities at not just a job opportunity, I want to say economic opportunity, because I don't want us to leave out youth-owned SMMEs who could play a fundamental role in this. And maybe just to add to it, because it is somewhat related to the industrialization, when we look at the green economy, what are we doing not just to legislate, but to provide opportunities for young people along the way? So many people are looking at solar power, so many people are looking at different types of power. Why are we not empowering youth-owned SMMEs, not just to install, to start the manufacturing process? At every point of that value chain, we want young people to be the fundamental focus of those things. And then you're going to start seeing a change in those unemployment rates. You're going to start having young people who say, I believe in the future of this country again.
Yeah. What does that social contract look like? I mean, in your other hat as head,
I was waiting for this one.
In the Gauteng province, you've signed some kind of a pact with the liquor traders, and in the context, of course, of that kind of collaboration. What would that look like in the mining space, particularly? Let us not talk illegal mining, because of course that's a criminal element that needs to be taken care of. But in the space of artisanal mining, maybe let's use that.
Yeah, I think that's actually a better way for us to deal with it. Putting on the other cap for a very short while. It's a perfect example. Artisanal mining, a lot of people don't quite understand this. When big mining companies leave certain mines, it isn't because there isn't anything left. It's because it's no longer commercially viable for a large company such as Anglo American, Harmony Gold, etc., to continue mining. But there is still opportunity for smaller artisanal types of mining opportunities. The first thing around it is the legislation. I agree fully with the President, and I think the Youth League would fully support this as well, around creating more laws to protect, but also to agitate for economic development. That's number one. But number two, it's about working with those people. It's about creating a forum. It's about saying, private sector, what can you do to support this as part of your corporate social investment? Right, the state, what do we need to do to provide safety and security? What do we need to do regular checkups? Okay, this particular artisanal miner is struggling with this kind of funding. How do we link them to the right people? So it sounds like common sense, but in reality it is. Because a social compact is not meant to be inaccessible. It's meant to be something that says, right, how do I go into that space? How do I raise this issue? Right, let's move it forward. And if we can't do it with legislation, regulation is your next best friend, because that goes through much faster. And I think that's something that we haven't done well enough. We haven't done enough to support informal economies. And often when we look at the unemployment rate, we're not looking at that informal economy. We are the majority, by the way, of young people who are hustling, are actually sitting in. And we need to do a lot more to support them.
Yeah. So when I bring the private sector around the table, talk about youth unemployment, they always say to me, the big challenge is skills, is that we are not training young people for the industries that would absorb them and be able to give them the jobs that they need. So they are putting the blame at education. I think that is where the problem is. The President, I think he repeated it 4 or 5 times to say, Colin Malachi, did you hear me? We have moved NSFAS, I think it was 430,000. It's now sitting at very close to 700,000, if not more, in terms of those who are beneficiaries. Is that the direction that you are seeing, dealing with the question of employment and the skills that are required?
A number of things. The first is that the private sector also can't totally absolve itself. 2/3 of the economy is sitting within the private sector. And so it is fundamental, actually, that the private sector also creates the environment for job opportunity. On the matter of skills, some of that is true. There is some element of a skills mismatch. And it's not just about throwing money at it. It's not just about putting money into NSFAS. It's about looking, and I mentioned this earlier, it's about looking at the main drivers of the economy. Are we educating people, and young people in particular, on those skills? So often when we speak to young people, they don't want to become plumbers or electricians or have an important vocational training or vocational skill. And I say to young people so often that you're almost guaranteed a job in that way. Because we always need plumbers. Look at the crisis now of load shedding. Many people need electricians. This thing blows, that thing blows. You're never going to be struggling for an opportunity in that regard. But as society, we haven't shifted. We want only lawyers, only certain types of engineers, only accountants. And we also as society have to make that shift and say, actually the TVET sector should be where we're putting young people. Number one, because we need to be putting more money into it. But number two, because those are the skills that the economy needs. So it's a combination of things. The state does need to be doing more to enhance that process, which there are processes there that are ongoing. It takes time. But it's also about us. It's about us at home saying, actually, I'm going to encourage my children, or I'm going to encourage myself to go and get that particular type of vocational skill. Everyone's, like I mentioned earlier, installing solar, boreholes, whatever. Who's got those skills to actually do those things? Yeah. It must be us as young people.
Fasiha Hassan still with us, representing the ANC Youth League, though, tonight, and that's the hat that she is wearing, giving us the young people perspective on the situation in the country and what the ANC promised to deliver, at least in the last 4 years. So the old people, Fasiha, are saying that 1.4 billion, I think, would have been spent on SMMEs, and about 90,000 of them. I mean, it doesn't even begin to touch sides of where it needs to be. But what's the youth perspective on that? Others are even saying, well, you are not even mentioning the businesses that you might have funded, maybe 15,000 or 20,000, that now would have been destroyed because of the load shedding. So that 1.5 billion that you would have spent has actually gone to waste.
I would definitely wager that a lot of those SMMEs are not, or the majority of them are not youth-owned. And that's actually quite important, because so many people think that if we give a grant opportunity or funding opportunity to an SMME, that's all they need. And that's a fallacy. The timing in which you give that money, number one, is important. The industry in which you're investing in is important. The kinds of intangible supports. And we right now on live on X as the Youth League, and we were actually talking about this, that it goes beyond just throwing money at something. It's about business mentorship. It's around learning the tricks of the trade. And anyone who started a business, those of you who are at home, know that it's so difficult to get through the first few years. Yeah. So it's not about a once-off tranche amount and saying, right, tick, tick, we've sorted out SMMEs. It's about removing a lot of the red tape. It's about checking up on those people, right? How do we move your business to the next level? It's about providing free Wi-Fi access in certain areas. It's about saying to the mama and the gogo on the side of the road, how do we take your fruit and veg business to the next level? Yeah. Maybe we need to get you a mobile fridge. How do we, it's about thinking a little bit more creatively. So I want to move away from this idea of we put X amount of money. Of course it's welcomed. There's never going to be enough money that we put into the sector. But what are we spending that money on? And how are we ensuring that there's value for that money and that there's impact in what we're spending? So
I know your structure has just been reinvigorated and reformed and renewed and being put together again as the ANC Youth League. But one would say one of the things that really you should be pushing for, as simple as that, to help these businesses survive is, guys, get the electricity right.
Yeah.
What's wrong with that? I know you guys are not convinced with the Public Enterprises Minister. You're not going to apologize. You still want him to come and explain himself. What is he doing in public enterprises, certainly to deal with the situation. But what is going on there? Why would something as just get the energy situation right would be so difficult and old people would be bickering about it?
Nail on the head there. If we can solve the electricity and energy crisis, let's call it an energy crisis, because it's not just around electricity. It's a little bit more nuanced and in-depth than that. If we can solve that, we can turn the economy around very quickly. Those same SMMEs we spoke about, how many of them need generators? So many. How many of them can afford the generators or the diesel that they require to run it? Very, very few. So the energy crisis almost, it's that pivot. When you put one thing in and then you turn it and everything moves. That's that one thing that we really need to focus on. And you hear a lot of bickering back and forth. I'll speak to our position in just a moment on the Public Enterprises Minister. But what is important here is that the best minds in the state, in the private sector, in civil society are actually focusing 90% of their energy in trying to fix this crisis. What we need to do is target that into the same outcomes. And we actually need to say, well, if the state is able to create the right types of regulation and laws, we've already started to do that. If Treasury can provide tax rebates, started to do that. If we can now, and this is the big bottleneck around the need of equipment, the need of the actual hard and fast of what we need to rebuild the electricity system. So, of course, there's the current grid that's in existence that we need to upgrade. And let's be very clear, the ANC Youth League position is not to bring about an end to coal. We understand it's fundamental, not just to the grid as a base load, but also to employment. Does that mean we're anti-green energy? Not at all. We're saying the gap between that needs to be filled with that green energy. And like we said earlier, we need young people to play a fundamental role in that process. But we're going to be very harsh, Thabo. And I must say this to the country. We are not used to having an active youth league. There is nothing wrong with us calling into account the performance of ministers, whether it's the Minister of Electricity, the Minister of Public Works, the Minister of Public Enterprises, etc., etc. In fact, it should be us who speaks first. Before society can complain, it must be the Youth League that says, no, hold on, you represent the organization as well. We are as angry as the young people on the streets, and we are going to ensure that you bring something tangible back to those young people. And I think it's important for the country to see it in that kind of light, because if we say nothing, we're as guilty, as complacent.
But why are you not convinced about his story that he's trying to sell you?
I don't think it's a personal matter. I think that, and we spoke about this a bit during the break, I on a personal level, feel very sorry for all of these ministers who are in very difficult positions. But unfortunately, we're in a crisis hour. And we must rise to the occasion. Yes, we must be pragmatic, but we must also be bold and courageous in our decision-making. We need to make decisions that may make us unpopular in the short run or in the short term, but ultimately take us over that bridge to a point in which we say, there's no load shedding. Or remember the time we used to have load shedding. That's where we need to go. And it needs a level of courage that I think we aren't seeing enough of. And that is us as the Youth League saying.
A simple thing as managing your asset register, right? We've lost 77 people. It's devastating. Yeah. It's a tragedy of
and counting, unfortunately.
Counting, right? Because we just had a building that was hijacked. And we knew it was hijacked. But we sat on our hands and did nothing about it. Well, it's hijacked. And we know it's hijacked. It's our asset. Yeah. We are the government. We own this asset. We know that it belongs in our books. But we did nothing about it until now, when lives are lost, and all of a sudden there'll be an inquiry and there'll be a big move to try and sort out this question.
And tragically, how many more buildings are there, quite like that, who are hijacked, not looked after, and we can have a legal argument about whose responsibility it is. I think that's been in the discourse a lot. I'm not going to deal with it too much, because I think we know there's this thing of, does the lessee have the legal obligation, does the city have it? But the reality is, there are too many things that we've let by the bar. And there's a lot more that we need to do. And now I'm putting on my hat very quickly as the COGTA chairperson in Gauteng. It is unacceptable for municipalities to not have a hold of what's going on. 77 people and counting. The Health MEC today said to us that number is going to rise. And those are not just 77 numbers. They are people. They are families. It's not okay that 77 people and more had to lose their lives. And this must be, the President said it, more than just a wake-up call. We need to do a full audit of all of those buildings. We need to, I said it, be bold and courageous. It may make us unpopular, but we have to find alternative housing. People cannot be living in undignified situations like that. And we need to be very bold and say we're moving people out into a better location, into better housing, but ultimately because we have a duty as the state to protect our people, whether they are South African or not. And that may sound controversial, but the reality is human life is human life.
Quick one, 30 seconds or so. Your reflection on what the President says around the one of the deliberations around BRICS and the formation of the BRICS Council. What's the position of the Youth League on that?
I think everybody knows we're quite pro sort of the BRICS dynamic. We welcome the inclusion of a number of other countries. Of course, we want to see more countries, particularly from the global south, but also countries who are able to match us in terms of economic opportunity. What is important? What kind of opportunities will be resulted in for young people? Can we study in those spaces and have directly transferable degrees or opportunities? Can we link up with other SMMEs in those countries and share skills? What does it mean for young people? And you're going to hear me say this from now until the end of the next 4 years of this term. All of those decisions must have a positive net impact on young people in this country so we can bring down that youth unemployment rate, but ultimately bring more dignity to young people in this country.
Fasiha, always love having you in the studio. Much appreciated. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
That is Fasiha Hassan speaking there on behalf of the ANC Youth League.